The Night Does Not End, Episode 1. We begin in the dark of rural 19th century Tennessee, in the dark of the womb. An unnamed boy crouches beside his drunken father, a former schoolmaster, listening to the man tell him about a meteor shower in 1833, the year of this kid's birth, the year of his first killing. Night of your birth, 33, the Leonids they were called. God, how the stars did fall. I look for blackness, holes in the heavens, the dipper stove. The kid, as he's called, doesn't express opinions. We are never granted access to his thoughts. He sees and he hears and he sometimes feels the textures of surfaces with his fingers, but he does not think or know. Not as verbs in McCarthy's sentences, anyway. He runs away in 1847 at the age of 14 and drifts south to New Orleans, where he lives above a tavern and where, for the first time, he is shot. Here McCarthy slyly introduces a theme that will run through the novel as women and people of color care for the kid, saving his life. He lies in a cot in the upstairs room for 2 weeks while the tavern keeper's wife attends him. She brings his meals, she carries out his slops, a hard-looking woman with a wiry body like a man's. By the time he is mended, he has no money to pay her, and he leaves in the night and sets out for Texas. McCarthy, born in 1933, exactly 100 years after the kid, also made this journey from Tennessee to Texas and seems to have found the change of location downright transformational. So does the kid. Only now is the child divested of all he has been. His origins are become remote as is his destiny, and not again in all the world's turning will there be terrain so wild and barbarous to try whether the stuff of creation may be shaped to man's will, or whether his own heart is not another kind of clay. Terrains so wild and barbarous. What is McCarthy talking about? Powder burn 'em, boys. Some historical context for 1840s Texas. In 1836, at the Battle of San Jacinto, Sam Houston annihilated the Mexican army led by General Santa Anna and won independence for the 7-week-old Republic of Texas. But his new nation had inherited Mexico's Comanche problem. Anglos had never seen anything like the Comanche, the fiercest light cavalry to ever ride upon the earth. It's not enough to say that they were master horsemen. Ulysses S. Grant, Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, and Nathan Bedford Forrest were all master horsemen, and any Comanche teenager could have ridden circles around these generals. Imagine an equestrian who rides with absolute wizardry and can do so without benefit of stirrups, saddle, reins, bit, or bridle. Combine this virtuosity with the talents of a professional acrobat, and then further combine it with that of an expert archer who can wield his bow and arrow from horseback. Stack these skills atop each other, add reckless bravery and a Navy SEAL's ability to shoot, move, and communicate, and you'll have some idea of what the Comanches were capable of, and why the Spanish, Mexicans, Apache, and now Texans feared them as they might a troop of Valkyrie. Comanche is a Ute word meaning enemy, or more precisely, anyone who wants to fight me all the time. The latter is certainly an accurate description of how other Plains tribes felt about the Comanche, particularly the Lipan Apache, sworn enemies of the Comanche, who'd been driven to the brink of extinction by these fierce horse warriors. The Comanche called themselves Nemina, the people. That name can also be translated as the human beings, and the connotation shouldn't be lost on us. If you were Comanche, you were human. But if you weren't Comanche, they gave no quarter and asked for none. Once a small, bullied tribe, they'd been driven south by the Lakota and hunted by other indigenous peoples. They were shorter of stature than other Plains Indians, and there were never more than 20,000 of them on the planet at any given time. Then, in the 1700s, the Comanche found a much-needed friend. Horses, not native to the Americas, were brought to the New World by the Spanish. In time, enough of these animals escaped captivity and reproduced in the wild that horse herds began to wander and graze on the North American plains, which was where the Comanche found them. There has never been a more auspicious meeting between animal and man. Soon, the Comanche were not only riding, they were raiding the communities who'd once attempted to enslave or annihilate them, performing feats from horseback that witnesses said had to be seen to be believed. They were like circus riders who would festoon any stranger they met with arrow shafts. Their policy toward the enemies they captured is well documented. The Comanche tortured, then killed the men, raped, then killed the women, enslaved the children, or adopted them into the tribe. Before the Texas Revolution, there were few quarrels between the Anglo-Texan and Comanche. Noah Smithwick, a blacksmith and Texas Ranger, decided to act as a kind of ambassador and went to live with the tribe for 3 months in the summer of 1837, returning to his friends with beads and moccasins, an oppressive new vocabulary, and a number of wild stories. Smithwick said that after living in a Comanche camp, he felt mean and almost ashamed of belonging to the superior race when listening to the recitals of wrongs the Comanche had suffered at the hands of my people. His phrase, superior race, is used with great sarcasm. But after the Revolution, the sentiments of the Comanche and the Anglo-Texan began to shift. It's as if the Comanche suddenly realized a vast new power would be encroaching on their ancestral hunting grounds, one with numbers they could hardly imagine. The Comanches were right to be alarmed. Their entire way of life revolved around the buffalo, a migratory animal which provided their food, clothing, shelter, sport, and the majority of their material culture. The Comanche never built structures out of stone, never made pottery, had no written language. Their lives were entirely nomadic. Anglo incursion meant the rapid dwindling of the Comanche's primary source of food and shelter, so the Comanche did what they'd always done. They declared war on these white men trespassing on their ancestral hunting grounds. Anglo-Texans would not be outdone when it came to declarations of violence. They formed ranging companies to ride out and meet the Comanche threat. These companies would soon be known as the Texas Rangers, a paramilitary unit that was also imbued with the powers of law enforcement. There is no other organization like this in American history, and the Rangers have a long and storied tradition, one that gleams with the light of folklore, legend, and myth. The early engagements between the Texas Rangers and Comanches resulted in a lopsided victory for the native warriors. There are a number of reasons for this, two of which are weapons technology and tactics. As it turned out, the Anglos were deficient in both. The Rangers of this period were expert marksmen with the Kentucky long rifle, a weapon which, as its name suggests, can't be fired or loaded from horseback. Encountering Comanche on the plains, Rangers would stop, dismount their horses, and take firing positions on the ground. This was a mistake. The rifled musket of the 1830s is a very capable weapon in the right hands, lethal out to 200 yards. A sharpshooter might push that distance to twice the range, but it takes a skilled operator to reload in under a minute. And while a competent shooter can hit a stationary target 2 football fields away, no attacking Comanche was ever stationary. A Comanche war party rode into battle at a gallop, wheeling their horses to the right to favor their borearms. Imagine the plight of the ranger, having just dismounted his horse, staked the reins, and proned out on the prairie to take aim on a charging enemy. The Comanche horsemen are 150 yards away, moving swiftly on their painted ponies, already whooping, lances glinting in the sun. You draw a bead on one of those horsemen. You have to lead your target, which means guessing how fast he's moving. You exhale a breath, get down on a good empty lung, and pull the trigger. But instead of a bang, you hear only a metallic snap. You forgot to splash the pan with powder. You disentangle your powder horn from your belt, pull the stopper, cock the hammer again, and pour gunpowder onto the steel pan, your hands starting to shake with nerves. You locate the warrior you'd taken aim at before. He's 100 yards away now and closing. The war whoops of his band are louder, and the braves have begun to lob arrows into the air. In several seconds they begin to fall around you. 3-foot missiles with barbed tips of flint. You follow the young Comanche man with the blade sight on the end of your barrel. He carries a shield of buffalo hide with bright orange suns painted across its surface, and he has begun to rotate the shield in a circle, a strangely disorienting maneuver. You exhale to steady yourself and pull the trigger, and then your ears are ringing and your field of view is obscured by an enormous cloud of white gun smoke. The air smells of cordite and sweat. When this cloud disappears, you see you've missed your target. The warrior is 50 yards away now, stretched along the neck of his pony. He has begun to wheel to your right flank with several of his comrades. Others are wheeling the other direction. Each of these men can pop 20 or more arrows a minute into you with surgical precision. You have to stand up to reload your rifle. You just make it to your feet when one of your friends hits the earth screaming, an arrow embedded in his rib cage. You pour gunpowder into your trembling palm, and standing the butt of your rifle on the ground, funnel this into the barrel of your weapon. An arrow whistles past your ear like a lethal bird. You take a lead ball from your shot pouch, wrap it in a cloth patch, and set it atop the muzzle. Then remove the ramrod from the underside of the rifle and begin to pound the bullet down the barrel inch by inch. If you don't get it all the way down, you'll have created a pipe bomb that will explode in your face when you pull the trigger. Arrows are striking your friends, some of whom lie dead or dying, some who have started to run. But the Comanche riders have encircled your company, cutting off all possibility of escape. You've raised your weapon, cocked the hammer, and started to shoulder the rifle when the tip of a razorous lance enters your navel and exits your back. You kneel on the prairie, gripping the bowdark handle of this weapon that's impaled you, your heart pumping bright arterial blood between your fingers, the feathers that decorate the lance catching the breeze, fluttering. The tribe that virtually annihilates Captain White's party in Blood Meridian? They are Comanche, Numina, the people. Then a small, delicate-looking man entered this battle between Texan and Comanche. In 1836, at the age of 19, Jack Coffee Hayes immigrated to Texas from his native Tennessee. The war for Texan independence had just ended, but there was still ample opportunity to court danger in this fledgling nation. Hayes quickly found work as a surveyor. Few occupations could have been more perilous. Though today Texans love to opine about the glory days of the Republic, a period that lasted less than a decade. The truth was that its government had no money, little economy to speak of, no public works. The Republic paid its officials, employees, rangers, and settlers in land. Land was precisely what had brought the majority of Anglo-immigrants from the United States, but even after they were awarded their head rights, as those parcels of 177 acres were known, the property had to be surveyed to make sure one man's claim didn't encroach on another's. This meant a surveyor would have to venture even farther west into Comanche country with his compass, change, and levels to certify the claim. Enter teenage Jack Hayes with his smooth, boyish face and sad eyes and high-pitched voice. It was terribly dangerous work. The Comanche tortured all their adult prisoners before killing them, but 3 professions received their special attention: Texas Rangers, buffalo hunters, and surveyors. Every Anglo surveyor was visible proof that more whites would soon be appearing in an area, and to the Comanches this meant further shrinkage of their hunting grounds. By 1840, Hayes had moved from the second most hazardous trade to one that was, in many cases, a death sentence. That year, he was appointed captain of a company of rangers, and the men who served with him would quickly learn that here on the frontier, looks were no measure of a man's mettle. Hayes would prove the fiercest fighter and most effective tactician the embattled Republic had ever seen. He remains to this day the Texas Ranger non-parallel. Descriptions of the slender captain warrant examination. John Salmon Ford, a ranger who enlisted in Hayes' regiment of the Texas Mounted Rifles during the Mexican-American War, had this to say: John C. Hayes was a deceptive man. He was small, standing just under 5 feet 8 and carrying barely 150 pounds on his wiry frame. He couldn't grow a beard or mustache. He wore modest clothes, usually a black leather cap, a blue roundabout, and black pants. He spoke little and ate little. He was nervous and walked slightly stooped. His cheeks were gaunt, and his hands were thin and pale. Beside his bewhiskered rangers in their huge wide-brimmed hats and loud garb, most of them over 6 feet and solidly built, Hayes looked little more than a boy. Ford clearly had difficulty reconciling Hayes' physical qualities with the man's fighting prowess. Hayes grasped the glaring tactical problems in the Rangers' previous engagements with the Comanche. Whenever his company sighted a war party out on the plains, he didn't order his men to dismount, stake their horses, and take aim with their long rifles. Instead, he ordered his men to draw their pistols and charge, holding fire until they were in contact distance. Then he'd turn to the Rangers, galloping beside him, and say, "Powder burn 'em, boys." Part 3. What we talk about when we talk about Glanton. The Comanches practiced a war of annihilation against the Lipan Apache, driving them down below the Rio Grande and into Mexico. In 1825, the Mexican government had invited Anglos into Texas as a way of putting a meat barrier between themselves and the Comanche. But by the mid-1840s, Mexico had lost Texas to the Americans and had traded their Comanche problem for an Apache one. And then there was war, looking for an excuse to invade Mexico and wrest what would become New Mexico, Arizona, and California away from the Mexican government. President James K. Polk sent General Zachary Taylor and his army down to the Rio Grande to ride around until they were attacked by Mexican soldiers. The Mexican soldiers soon obliged them, and war was on. Lacking an effective cavalry with knowledge of the region, the U.S. Army allowed companies of Texas Rangers to muster in. Many Rangers would make their name in the Mexican War. Several would lose their lives. There was Jack Hayes, Samuel Walker, Bigfoot Wallace, Rip Ford, and a surly sociopath named John Joel Glanton. The ranger captains didn't much like Glanton. John Salmon R.I.P. Ford hated him. Rip Ford, a legendary Texan who got his sobriquet writing "Rest in Peace" after every ranger's name on the casualty list during the Mexican-American War, had no patience for Glanton's insolence and his burgeoning criminality. In a footnote from Ford's memoirs, historian Stephen B. Oates has this to say: only 26 when he joined the United States Army in January 1847, John Joel Glanton got into trouble for shooting a Mexican civilian during the war. Glanton claimed he did it in self-defense. Eyewitnesses said he did it in cold blood. When Army police sought to put him in irons, he borrowed food and ammunition from his friend, Walter P. Lane, and rode for Texas. Later, he re-enlisted in Jack Hayes' 2nd Regiment and saw action through the Mexico City expedition. After the war, in 1849, Glanton, attracted by the stories of gold in California, left his wife and 2 children in San Antonio and headed for the Pacific coast. He paid his way by killing Apaches and selling the scalps at $50 apiece to the Mexican authorities. Some said the scalps were not always Apache. I cannot believe that McCarthy didn't read this exact footnote when doing research for Blood Meridian. It's something of an elevator pitch for his novel. When we first encounter Glanton in Blood Meridian, he and his gangs are being hired by the Chihuahua government to hunt those Lipan Apaches whom the Comanches had forced south of the Rio Grande. When Toadvine and the Kid, held prisoner at this point in the book by Mexican authorities in Chihuahua City, enlist in Glanton's gang, Blood Meridian shifts into high gear and doesn't slow down until readers reach a certain ferry in Yuma, Arizona. Part 4. The Spring of the Year 1849. This is the environment that the 16-year-old kid rides into on page 5 of the novel, aback his aged mule. He enters the town of Nacogdoches on the eastern border of Texas and walks out of the rain into the revival tent of the Reverend Green. The kid has barely begun listening to this preacher's sermon when an enormous man enters the tent right behind him, bald as a stone, with no trace of a beard and no brows to his eyes nor lashes to them, close on to 7 feet in height. The character's name is Judge Holden, and McCarthy did not invent him out of whole cloth. In my next entry, For the Night Does Not End, I'll explore the historical and literary ingredients that McCarthy combines to create the explosive mixture that is The Judge.